The phrase for today is the Great Inversion. And no, we're not talking about weather. But welcome to the Lunchbox Devotion. I'm Pastor Russio. Glad to have you with us. Now, I want you to do something real quick. I want you to imagine what you would see if you were on a crowded city street. There we go. Okay, that's what it looks like to you, right? Only wrong. Stop. That's not what it actually looks like at all. It's just what you think it looks like. You know what the crazy thing is? That's what your brain has learned to see, but what the eyes in your head actually see is an entirely different thing. Our eyes actually see all of the images that come into them blurry, backwards, and upside down. You ever wonder what it is that babies are crying about? Maybe it's the fact that everything they see is blurry, backwards, and upside down. You see, it takes the human brain a while to start converting the images your eye sees into something useful in your brain. You don't even know you're doing it because you learned to do it when you were just weeks old. That baby brain learns to make it unblurry, learns to make it forward instead of backwards, and learns to invert the image so as it's not upside down. You don't know that you're doing it. Your brain's doing it all the time. In fact, your brain can't stop doing it. So if you just thought for a moment, I want to see things the way they appear on the retina of my eye, not the way my brain interprets it. Brain, stop interpreting. Your brain couldn't. You can't not see things correctly, even though your eyes are seeing things weirdly. And that's awesome. But the problem is that our human brains do this with all sorts of things. We invert things all the time and don't realize that we've done it. And I want to start with a scripture text. And I'm going to tell you, this is the problem with this scripture text. And the scripture text goes like this. Somebody asked Jesus, what is the summary of the law? And Jesus says to them, I'll tell you what the summary of the law is. The law is this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, that's great, right? And in fact, the people listening to it at the time went, oh, good answer, Jesus. Nice one. The problem is we human beings, we don't like that answer, really. And there's a problem with that answer. And the problem with that answer is it's hierarchical. See, Jesus says the first thing you have to do is love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And then you're going to put everything in God's hands. And then you're going to love your neighbor as yourself. We want to invert this truth. We want to take this truth and turn it into something different. And I'm going to tell you why. And it's really simply this. We want to take this truth and turn it into the summary of the law is to love the Lord your neighbor with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. And the second is like it, to love God as you love yourself. And I'm going to tell you, human beings want to do this because it puts us in the driver's seat. You see, as long as we're loving God first, that means we're having to put God first. And this is the way Jesus wanted it to be because he knows that us human beings, we need God to define truth for us. Because if you leave us to define truth, we're going to do all sorts of crazy stuff because we're creatures that see things blurry, upside down, and backwards. And our brains trick us into thinking that it's right side up, forwards, and not blurry. And we do the same thing with truth all the time. So God knows that we have to love him first because if we love God first above all else, then we're going to see things from his point of view, and then we're going to have actual wisdom. Let me give you some for instances. I don't know if you know who this guy is. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. If you watch Bachelor, you know who he is. He was one of the Bachelor contestants. In fact, he was the Bachelor. And what made him so interesting was that he was a social deviant. He was a weirdo. He was backwards. He was strange. And what made him all those things? He was a virgin. And The whole time he was on the show, all of the young ladies who were there, they all had this attitude of, well, we better fix this social deviant. He's just got to give up on this craziness. When did that become a bad thing? When did being a virgin actually be a sign that there's something wrong with you? Well, the reason is, of course, if you define sexuality in human terms, boy, we want to do it, don't we? So if you look at it upside down, backwards, and blurry long enough, your brain fools you into thinking that if everybody's having lots of premarital sex, it must be in focus, right side up and forwards. Another really great and terrible example is abusive relationships. People who are in abusive relationships say that they're in the relationship because they love this person and this person loves them, when it could not possibly be more upside down, backwards, or blurry. If you really turned that relationship right side up, forwards, and made it clear, it would be the exact opposite of love. Us human beings, we want to do the great inversion with the truth that Jesus said. That first you love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, which means you love him with all your trust. You read his word, you study his will, you walk in his ways, you trust him to tell you what the difference between truth and nonsense is. And then you know how to love your neighbor. Because as human beings, boy, we can invert things really bad. It's the great inversion. It happens amongst Christians. It happens amongst church leadership. It happens amongst well-meaning people who say, hey, I want to love my neighbor. First you have to love God. Love God enough to understand God's will for your life and everyone else's. When that happens, then you can love your neighbor without doing harm to your neighbor. Because when we human beings try to love on our own, we're likely to bring a lot of danger into the equation because we're upside down, backwards, blurry people. And the world needs us to be right side up. The world needs us to see things clearly. The world needs us to see forward because we are the people who are bearing God's witness and wisdom to the world. So I say to you all today, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. And remember, you got to do them in that order because otherwise you can be a victim of the great inversion. All right, everybody. Thanks for spending some lunchtime with me. God bless you all. See you next week. Stick around for our announcements.